Jesus' resurrection based on the movie titled Risen. So if you haven't watched it yet, or maybe saw it a year ago or so, I really suggest that you get it and watch it. It is so very, very good. It's from the perspective and the eyes of the Roman centurion. And the Roman soldier did such a good job of representing, oh man, even thinking about it just gives me chills. I mean, when he saw Jesus after the resurrection, it was amazing. So I'd like to start this sermon with a little story. This is a story that takes place in an airplane, or an airport. And some people bring their pets in crates. Well, this is about the attendants that were responsible to load the pets onto the aircraft. One day, somebody was unloading the aircraft and saw that a dog was dead. And this person thought, oh no, the dog's dead. So he met the owner of the dog, and he told him a little fib. He said, your dog was rerouted to Phoenix, Arizona. So if you come back tomorrow, your dog will be here. Phoenix will bring it back by tomorrow. Then you can come get the dog tomorrow. And the guy said, okay, well, that's fine. So the attendant thought it was his fault that the dog had died. So he quick went to a pet store and found a dog that looked like the dead dog. So he purchased the dog, brought it back, and the next day the man came and the attendant gave him the dog, and the man said, that's not my dog. And the attendant said, how do you know? It probably looks different because it's fatigue from traveling. So your dog's probably looking a little jet lagged. The guy said no, and they went back and forth. The guy was saying, this is not my dog. And the attendant said, oh, yes, it is. And finally, the attendant said, how do you know that this is not your dog? And the guy said, well, my dog was dead. I was bringing it back for burial.
Oh, goodness.
I hope I got the humor of that okay. It's hard to translate jokes sometimes, but yeah. You don't normally, things don't normally come back to life, right? But 2,000 years ago, an amazing thing happened that had never happened before. There were a few people with broken hearts gathered together because someone they loved had just died. And the man that they had witnessed being crucified and speared was gone. And when they went to the tomb, an angel came and said, the tomb is empty, he is not here, he has risen. And that was a fact. That was the most important news in the history of our world. This man who was entombed was not there. The tomb was empty. That was the most significant incident in our history. Before Christ and after Christ, BC and AD is how we explain our historical timeline. And in John 20, verse 19, it said, on the evening of the first day of the week, Sunday, the disciples had gathered together in a locked room for fear of the Jewish leaders. When Jesus appeared among them, and Jesus said, peace be with you. Then all of a sudden, while Jesus was with them, he let them know that now you have a reason to live. You have a reason to die. You know what you're living for. You know what you will die for. And then Jesus appeared to Mary. Jesus told Mary, you no longer have to live in fear. You do not have to even fear death. Then Jesus appeared to Peter and explained that you don't have to go through life feeling guilty any longer because of your failures and the fact that you denied me 3 times before my crucifixion. And you don't have to feel guilty any longer because I have forgiven all. And then Jesus appeared to Thomas. And Jesus said, you don't have to doubt any longer. This resurrection is your dose of hope, so that you may know that I am alive. That is truly good news. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 14, Paul is writing, he says, if Christ had not risen from the dead, then our preaching and teaching is worthless. Our faith is for naught. Why did Paul say that? You know, the Christian faith is a living faith, right? We believe in the resurrection. And if you can prove it didn't happen, then the Christian faith would absolutely be gone completely. You know the Guinness Book of World Records? Are you familiar with that, Guinness Book of World Records? They have one man who was an historical lawyer named Sir Lionel Lacou. That's a kind of a cool name, huh? He's British. And he won 245. He won cases defending 245 murderers, and of those murderers, he was successful getting their sentences waived in all of them. And Queen Elizabeth knighted him. And so he became a knight. How do you sign knight? I don't think we ever signed for knight, do we? I'm going to figure spell it. So he was knighted twice by the Queen. And this man was absolutely brilliant. He knew how to present all the evidence he needed to get those 245 murderers acquitted. So the Queen knighted him. You know, he was famous when he was knighted first, but by the time he got the second knighthood, he was really renowned. So someone challenged Sir Lacou to help that person prove that Jesus had resurrected and had risen. You're a non-believer. You're famous for your research and your ability to find evidence. Can you check this out? And Lacou accepted the challenge. So he researched for several years. It was not a quick research, not overnight or 1 or 2 weeks. We can hear people laughing, so we're wait a second for Robin to mute everybody. All right. No, I don't think I'm muted. So anyway, Sir Lacou accepted the challenge, and he researched for several years. And you know what he ended up saying? This is so incredibly cool. He said, I have zero doubt through my evidence that Jesus did resurrect. And my evidence is so very powerful and true that once you see them, you will be unable to deny it either. And so he became a Christian when he was 64 years old. He Before that, he was a non-believer. But once he did the research, he believed when he was 64. That's how absolutely powerful the good news of Jesus Christ is, right? But it's also interesting because the world has got so many different theories and ideas about what happened with Jesus' body. One is called the objection. People come with all kinds of objections, and objective number one is known as the swoon theory. People who believe that say that in the 1800s, this became popular. And they say Jesus did not die and rise. Jesus was tortured and speared. You know, it was on the side of his heart, you know, he was bleeding out. They said, yes, he was speared, but he did not die. He instead was in a coma. When he was entombed, the cave was cool enough. And then he was able to resurrect and woke up from his coma due to the smells of the cave and the death and destruction that was there. You know, he had lost a lot of blood and a lot of fluid from his wrists and his side. And you know that probably came straight from his heart. He was whipped. He had the crown of thorns. He lost a great deal of blood. But they still say that once he was taken off the cross and entombed and anointed with the burial spices, that's what brought him back to life. And if that theory is true, that means that Jesus survived a severe flogging, blood loss, crucifixion, more blood loss, being speared into the side, more blood loss, being entombed with spice, with 75 pounds of spice weighing down his body in its weakened state. And he survived there 3 days with no food or water. That means when he woke up, there was no medical assistance. He didn't have any blood. His tomb garments had become solidified by the third day. They'd become more like plaster, which means he was able to unplaster himself. So Jesus was inside the tomb, and you can see where there was an indentation where the stone would be locked into place. So Jesus moved the stone away and fought with 4 high-powered Roman guards with their shields and their sabers and their daggers and their spears. So Jesus was able to fight with them and beat them all. And then Jesus was able to walk to Emmaus with no shoes, with nails sticking out of his hands and wrists. Come on. Don't you think that sounds ridiculous? That's really ridiculous, right? Who could survive that? That was objection number 1. And Sir Lucky proved that that was a nuts theory. Objection 2 is known as the stolen body theory. Some people say there's no way that Jesus rose from the dead. Someone must have stolen his body. And it must have, so they started looking for who could have taken Jesus' body. In Matthew chapter 28, verse 12 through 15, it says, when the chief priests met with the elders, they devised a plan. They gave the soldiers a lot of money and told them, you must say that the disciples came throughout the night and stole Jesus' body while we were asleep. If that report is given to the governor, that will satisfy the governor, and we will avoid trouble. So the soldiers did take the bribe, and they did follow instructions, and that was the story that has been passed down to this very day within the Jewish community. Now that theory has some problems. Problem one is they thought that, did the Roman government steal his body, or did the Jewish leaders steal the body? But it doesn't make any sense to think about that. Because the government and the Jewish leaders wanted to find Jesus' body to prove he wasn't God. And in this movie, Risen, we can't show it because the captioning is messed up. The movie itself is captioned, but the clips are not. So anyway, the Roman soldier came to the king and said, the body's gone. And the soldier said, well, who took it? And the king said, well, go find out. Go find the body. You find the body. And the Jewish leader said, someone stole the body. So we have to spread the rumor or start the story that someone had taken Jesus' body. And then the king said, but it would be better if you go ahead and start to search diligently and find the dead body and then bring it on to display to prove that Jesus was dead and had not risen again. So the soldier said, okay, you can see this Roman soldier start to think about, you can start to think, you can see his soul starting to believe that maybe this is possible. It's pretty cool in the movie. So the third idea was maybe the disciples had taken the body. But that was silly, because once the disciples saw the resurrected Jesus, they decided that they would live even if it meant they were in poverty, and they were going to preach for the rest of their lives. And some of them did experience beatings and flogging and imprisonment and death for Jesus. 11 of the 12 disciples were martyred for Jesus. They would experience torture. 6 of them were crucified. All of them were persecuted terribly. And they refused to deny the resurrection of Christ. They refused to deny that they had seen the risen Christ. And people still die for Jesus today, right? But people aren't really willing to die for something that might have happened or might not have happened. No one would do that. People are only willing to die for something that they absolutely know is true and right. Now the third objection is called the hallucination theory. This is crazy too. There's some folks who say that people were so worked up after Jesus was entombed and were just looking forward to his resurrection that they hallucinated it and said, oh, I saw Jesus. And all these different people had the same hallucination at different places and times because they were so worked up about it. But hallucination didn't happen at the same time because over 500 people saw Jesus after his resurrection. And 500 people would not have the absolute same hallucination. That's an impossibility. The disciples didn't expect Jesus to resurrect. They just saw Jesus dead. Then they went to this room in fear and prayed and talked about what they were going to do because they knew that Jewish leaders were coming to get them and were going to be crucifying them as well. They didn't expect Jesus to rise. So they did not hallucinate that Jesus was there with them. Now, in the movie, when the Roman soldier sees Jesus, it's pretty astounding. That's the favorite part, my favorite part of the whole show. So anyway, the third objection was that. And then we've got a fourth objection. And this was called the wrong tomb theory. We do know that Jesus was entombed in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb, and we know where that tomb was. But the thinking is some of the disciples went to the wrong tomb, and Jesus wasn't there. But we know that the angels had already announced that he is not here. He is risen. So what's left? The Bible records 500 witnesses who saw Jesus. Let me repeat that, 500 witnesses. So the news of Jesus' resurrection spread like wildfire throughout the community, all over the area. And everyone had the same story. There weren't modifications, there weren't changes in it. The story stayed that Jesus is alive. Even though people could have been confronting murder or crucifixion, and they could have been killed for preaching that, they still went ahead and kept saying the good news, even though the Roman government was savage and would slaughter them. They did not deny. They said, I saw Jesus. He was resurrected. And that story spread throughout the land by many different people. And that shows in the movie as well. From the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament, there were so many prophecies. 300 prophecies, in fact, that came true. Let me repeat that. 300 prophecies from the Hebrew Testament, from the Torah, the Old Testament of the Bible, that were fulfilled. Let me give you a few. It said he would ride into Jerusalem on a donkey. He will enter the temple. He will be betrayed by a close friend. He will be sold for 30 pieces of silver. The silver will be thrown into the temple. The silver will be used to purchase the potter's field. He will be forsaken and neglected by his disciples. False witnesses will accuse him. He will keep silent in the face of his accusers. He will be wounded. He will be whipped and spit upon. He will be mocked. His hands and feet will be pierced. He will be crucified with thieves. People will look on him with disdain. His clothing will be divided by lots. He will be offered gall and vinegar to drink while he's being crucified. He will emit a death cry. Not one of his bones will be broken. His heart will literally burst. His side will be pierced. Darkness will come upon the day. He will be buried in a rich man's tomb. He will resurrect from the dead. Isn't that cool? All of these prophecies are just verification of Jesus. They have eyewitnesses as well. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 3 through 8, Paul says, Jesus appeared more than 500 more than 500 brothers and sisters saw them, and some of them are still living during the time of Paul's writing. The prophecies occurred. There were eyewitness reports. The disciples confronted persecution and death, and today disciples worldwide confront the same thing because they say that Jesus is not here, Jesus has risen. And Jesus is the Lord and King of all. The resurrection's real. No one could do that kind of witnessing for no reason or for something that's false. Many people who don't believe Jesus are brilliant and renowned, but once they start to do the research, as Sir Lionel Lockwood did, another one, Simone Greenleaf, was a Jewish professor. He was huge. He had a huge authority on the history of the U.S., and he needed proof. He actually founded Harvard Law School. He was renowned for gathering evidence, and he did his own investigation of this and converted to Christianity. Another man, Edmund Bennett, he was the dean of the law school in Boston University. It's a very famous university. And he did research on the resurrection. Prior to his research, he thought it was an impossibility. After his research, he also became a Christian. Frank Morrison was a journalist and an attorney who was setting out to prove that the resurrection was false. That was his intent. So he worked hard. And by the end, he realized that the resurrection truly had occurred, and then he dedicated his life to Christ from then on out. Now, Josh McDowell was an agnostic. That means he wasn't really a believer, and he was researching the resurrection because he thought it was a false story. But once he delved into it, he converted to the Christian faith. And now he helps convert thousands of people who are also agnostic, or were also agnostic. Lee Strobel, he's won awards. He's the legal editor at the Chicago Tribune. He was actually an atheist. He researched for a very long time to prove that God is not real, that Jesus was not resurrected. He spent lots of time, lots of money on it, and he became one of the greatest Christians and preaches today. He's written so many books and preaches consistently that Jesus did rise and that he was wrong. The disciple John wrote in chapter 8, verse 31, that you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Amen and amen.